Okay, so just working through the primary source sheet that handed out yesterday. So as I said, it's on Daymap and on the Google Classroom. The file name is Week 1 Roman Daily Life Seminar or something like that, source seminar. So that's the particular document. So it's just got all these primary sources listed. You notice after each one there is a reference. So if you reference those in your essays or your written work generally, just reference them in brackets afterwards, or if you do it as a block quote, just put it below it, just like I've got it there, but just type it out exactly like I've got it there. So you can just copy and paste that off the digital documents if you like. So the first ones were talking about Roman citizenship, and this tells us the story because the Romans loved inscribing their life story. So on tomb inscriptions, and this one is a tomb inscription, they'll usually have the person's career and important events in their life, but there'll also be commemorative inscriptions of various sorts, and they love to have these, their careers remembered, and they're all about sort of place and memory and leaving something behind for posterity. They want it to be known and remembered. So this one is the story of Gaius Julius Mygdonius, a Parthian by nationality. Now the Parthians lived outside the Roman Empire, and the Parthians were sort of like the only empire that bordered on the Roman Empire that sort of like was a rough equivalent or rough equal. They weren't as powerful as the Roman Empire, but they certainly were powerful and were able to compete with the Romans and defeat them on occasions. But this particular guy was a prisoner of war. So he's a Parthian by nationality, so outside the Roman Empire, an enemy of the Romans, freeborn, so he wasn't a slave, who was captured in his youth and taken to Roman territory. So he could have been an inhabitant of a town or village that the Romans raided and he was enslaved, or perhaps he was captured as a prisoner of war. And usually what happened to prisoners of war, that they were enslaved. So he might have been a Parthian soldier. We don't really know. His name was probably Mygdonius or something like that. But he tells us that he was made I was taken to Roman territory where I was made a free Roman citizen. So probably he was taken prisoner, and then sometime after that he was set free. So hopefully you'll remember, as I said yesterday, when a Roman citizen set a slave free, that slave then became a Roman citizen themselves. So he's kind of like jumped the queue of all these people out in the provinces who weren't Roman citizens. By virtue of being a slave for that time, he's now become a Roman citizen. And we also know that the person who set him free was Gaius Julius, someone or other. So quite likely that's actually the emperor, and he was perhaps part of the imperial household and set free, because the emperor at that period in the 1st century AD would have been either Augustus or Tiberius, so probably Augustus, and his official names his first two names were Gaius Julius. Might have also been someone who was a freedman of that emperor, because they would have the names Gaius Julius as well. But we know whoever he was, Gaius Julius, someone or other, set Mygdonius free, and so when he became a Roman citizen, he took the name of the person who set him free. He was made a free Roman citizen. With fate as my ally, I set aside a retirement fund for when I became 50 years old. Nice to retire when you're 50. I've missed that mark. I've been heading for old age since my birth. Now, O grave, receive me. I am willing. With you, I shall be free from care. So it got a little bit dark in the last line or so there. But it kind of tells us a little bit about a fairly interesting career. He started out as a Parthian, possibly a soldier, an enemy of Rome. He was captured in war, he was enslaved, but then he was set free. And he was able to afford for himself a fairly substantial tomb inscription and monument. And that meant he must have been at least moderately wealthy, what we would probably term middle class. It was very important to the Romans, as I say, to be remembered. And a lot of them, like soldiers in particular, would have what they call burial clubs, where they actually, kind of like life insurance, they'd all pay in together. And then if someone was killed or died, the burial club then paid for his funeral and for a monument to be set up on his grave, and that was quite important to them. He said that he actually set money aside. He was able to set money aside for when he turned 50 years old. So this whole process of being captured, being a slave, being set free took place apparently when he was fairly young. And then as a citizen, he was able to save some money working at what we don't really know. He doesn't say. And he passed away sometime after he was 50 years old. The reference there, CIL, that stands for, you don't have to write this out in full, Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum. That's what CIL stands for, which means basically the collection of Latin inscriptions. So Latin was the language that the Romans spoke. So pretty much all of our inscriptions from the Roman Empire are either in Latin or in Greek. And military inscriptions are almost always Latin, because Latin was the official language of the army. And then you've got a volume number after that. So they're basically these massive thick books, like there's digital versions of them now too. But when I was at uni, they were like enormous books. And they have like volume 1 is from Italy, and their various different volumes are from different places in Italy and then further around in the empire. So that's from volume 11, number 137. Then it tells us it's a tomb inscription from the early 1st century AD. So there are literally thousands of these tomb inscriptions, some of them very, very brief, some of them tell us a great deal about the career of that person. So that tells us a little bit about how someone who started out as an enemy of Rome could end up as a Roman citizen and reasonably wealthy, reasonably well off. So it was a very kind of socially mobile sort of society, and the Roman citizenship was something that was highly prized. So one of the reasons that it's thought that the Roman Empire was so successful and was able to expand is that they weren't exclusive, that people from the provinces could become Roman citizens. They could kind of transfer to the winning team and become a part of the Roman Empire and work for it, even get into the government, the army. And so a lot of people did that, and Gaius Julius Macedonius was one of them. The next one is a rescript of the Emperor Claudius from AD 46. And this records a time where a town was claiming Roman citizenship and other people were claiming that they weren't Roman citizens. And the Emperor Claudius gives a rescript. So a rescript is basically when an appeal or a question is given to the emperor then gives a rescript, an answer basically, but that then becomes a basis of law, that other people can quote that rescript basically as a law and say, well, he did that once, so you need to do the same thing now. So judges would look through imperial rescripts to see what previous emperors had said, and they would use that as the basis of their ruling. This particular one, the emperor says, I realise there is little reason for granting these people citizenship. Nevertheless, they have claimed Roman citizenship for a long time because of their association with Tridentum. And I fear it would not be possible to remove it now without serious injury to this splendid municipality. So this is like a small town near Tridentum. Tridentum has unquestionably got Roman citizenship. This small town nearby is claiming it, and some people saying they are, some people saying they aren't. Claudius is basically saying, haven't really got much basis for it, but they've claimed it for years, and we kind of like damage the municipality, the city of Tridentum, if we took it away from them. I therefore permit them to remain in the status of citizens. I grant this is a special favour, all the more willingly, because many people from this area are already serving in my personal bodyguard, and some even hold the rank of junior officers. Others are enrolled in the juries at Rome and sit at public trials. Therefore, I grant them this favour, that whatever they have done by virtue of their presumed citizenship within their own town or among the Tridentini or any other people shall be considered legally binding. Furthermore, the names they adopted previously by virtue of their citizenship, I will now allow them to retain as citizens in fact. So it's basically saying you weren't really citizens, but you kind of like acted like them for so long that I'm just going to let it go. And so you basically, by that basically settles the question that they were citizens. There was no such thing as like a passport or a citizenship certificate or something like that. But in the future, people would be able to refer to that particular rescript and say, well, look, the emperor made us citizens, so done. So that meant all of their descendants after that, from a legal marriage, would be considered to be Roman citizens. That too is an inscription, so it's got that CIL there. So that means it's actually an inscription. If you ever see that, it means it's a physical inscription. So inscriptions are really important because they tell us these facts about their careers, their first-hand, their primary, very first-hand primary sources, usually carved by the immediate descendants or by that person themselves in their lifetime or shortly after their death. And so they're right from that time, but of course they're not necessarily unbiased, because if you're, thinking of an inscription that you want to record your career, you're not going to say, yeah, I stuffed this up and yeah, that wasn't really great or anything like that. You're obviously only going to record the good points. And so that's what they do as well. So Mygdonius, for example, if we go back to the first one, doesn't tell us that he became a slave. He just says, I was captured and taken to Roman territory. I became a free citizen. Pretty sure there was like a period of slavery in there, but he leaves that one out. So every type of evidence has good and bad points. And one of the things I want you to do in your assignments, particularly the virtual museum, is to assess the evidence. How valuable is it? How reliable is it? Is it, first-hand? Is this actually an eyewitness to the events, or is it someone writing 100 years later? Just assess the evidence and try and talk a little bit about how valuable that is. Now, with each of these slides in your virtual museum, whether it's an image or a text or something, you're to annotate it. And one of the things I'd expect you to talk about is what kind of evidence it is, how valuable and useful it is. The third piece is the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire, who reigned from 31 BC to AD 14. Tells us about the census that he took. So a census basically is a count of Roman citizens. So it's not telling us the population of the Roman Empire, but it's telling us how many Roman citizens there are in the empire. In my sixth consulship, which we refer to as 28 BC, I made a census of the people with my colleague Marcus Agrippa. During this census, I made the count of the citizens. The previous count had been made 41 years earlier. In this count, I found 4,063,000 Roman citizens. Later, when Gaius Censorinus and Gaius Asinius were consuls, which we know as AD 8, I conducted a second count. At that time, I found 4,233,000 citizens. By virtue of my consular power, I conducted a third count with my son and colleague Tiberius Caesar, while Sextus Pompeius and Sextus Appuleius were consuls, which we know as AD 14. That was the same year that Augustus died. At that time, the number of Roman citizens was 4,937,000. So that gives us an idea of how many Roman citizens there were in the empire. But why do you think Augustus is recording these counts? What does it show when you compare those three numbers?
How the empire's growing.
How the empire's growing. So Augustus brought peace to the empire. He did it by killing everyone else, but hey, it's still peace. The civil wars were over. And so part of his claim was that he did all these things to bring prosperity and power to the Roman Empire, and the empire is getting bigger. It's also more peaceful and more prosperous. So again, that's not the number of people in the empire, that's the number of citizens, so Roman citizens in the empire. But it's gone up by close to 1 million just in his lifetime. So he's claiming that he's done great things. And the term there, res gestae Dii Augusti, means basically the things done by the divine Augustus. So that's an inscription that he set up to record his career. So it goes right through his career from when he was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, and how he fought others in the Roman civil wars and finally managed to make himself emperor, and then all the things that he did while he was emperor. So it just records his whole career, and we know it as the just RGDA, you might see it called sometime, or just res gestae. Res means a thing, or things sometimes. Gestae means things having been done. So again, a very useful primary source. That's Augustus telling us about his achievements, but what would be a drawback of it?
Making himself look better.
Okay, he's obviously telling us about his career, so he's going to make himself look as good as possible. He's not going to mention all of the, bloodthirsty massacres and things like that during the civil wars. The number of Roman citizens he probably killed or caused to be killed in those wars. He kind of glosses over all that. But certainly we can appreciate that, it's still valuable. So just because a source is biased doesn't mean it's not useful. Every source has got some bias or other. We just have to bear them in mind to understand, we need to take this all with a little bit of grain of salt. It's not going to be a purely objective source. In fact, I don't think there's any such thing. The fourth one, we went through this yesterday. I'll quickly go through it again today. Acts chapter 22, verses 23 through 29. So it's from the New Testament. So it's written as basically from a religious perspective, but it's telling us about historical events. So just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean if you're an atheist, you don't just discard it. It's still a historical document. It's a document from that time, and it tells us a lot of information. In fact, it can be quite useful because it's one of the very few documents from that period that wasn't written by an aristocrat, by a very wealthy person. The New Testament is written by people that are sort of like we'd term perhaps middle class or working class. So they're not like powerful Roman generals and commanders and things like that. They're more like everyday guys. They're talking about Paul the Apostle, St. Paul, and he got himself arrested because of a riot. The Jews were rioting against him in Jerusalem. As they cried out and tore their clothes and threw dust into the air, which are ways that Jewish people at the time indicated they were extremely unhappy, the commander, that's the commander of the Roman garrison in Jerusalem, ordered him to be brought into the barracks and said he should be examined under scourging, in other words, by whipping. So they were kind of a bit brutal about the way if they wanted, to interrogate someone, they'd tie him up to a frame and whip him first, and that might, persuade them to tell the truth. Tell them what they want to hear. And that was sort of that wasn't even something they went to if necessary. That was kind of their first port of call. But as they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion, so a centurion is a Roman officer in charge of 100 men, roughly, who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?" And as I said, everyone knew that it is not lawful to do that. So if someone's a Roman citizen, you can't just tie them up and whip them to interrogate them. They have to actually be tried by a jury of Roman citizens before you can do anything to them. So the governor or the commander of a garrison, if he's not a Roman citizen, they can do pretty much whatever they want. But if you're a Roman citizen, you've got certain protections. Paul was a Roman citizen, and so he was protected against those actions. As I said, we went through the rest of it yesterday. But again, if you're referring to something in your text that's from the New Testament like that, just do it exactly like that. Just put the book name, the chapter and the verses. And that's how we reference those. So again, just if you're using any of these, reference them just exactly as I've got them. On the other side, now we talked about the senatorial career. So remember... So the senatorial order was the highest order of Roman citizens, only about 600 men and their families. The equestrian order was several thousand, sort of like the next one down. So there's a wealth and birth qualification there, and same for the equestrian order. If you were a former slave, you could aspire to be part of the equestrian order, but you would never become a senator. That wouldn't be allowed. but you could become a member of the equestrian order if you earned enough money, basically, to be enrolled in that order. But we have here, the first one is a senatorial career. So this is a guy that was born into the senatorial order. It's another statute, plinth. So as you see, CIL, volume 5, number 5262, a statute plinth from Comum in Italy in the early 2nd century AD. So 2nd century AD is the 100s AD, 1st century AD is sort of like 50 AD, 60 AD, 3rd century is 200 and something. A little bit confusing, but you get used to it eventually. But it tells us the career of Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, son of Lucius of the Ufanita tribe, consul and augur. He served as imperial governor of the province of Pontus and Bithynia with consular powers, to which province he was sent by enactment of a senatorial decree initiated by the Emperor Caesar Nerva Trajan Augustus Germanicus Dasychus, father of his country. So that's just the titles of the emperor. He was also caretaker of the bed of the Tiber. The Tiber is the river that flows through Rome. And the banks and sewers of the city, prefect of the public treasury of Saturn, prefect of the military treasury, praetor, tribune of the plebs, quaestor, nominated by the emperor, one of the 6 men in charge of a squadron of Roman equestrians, military tribune of the Legio III Gallica, and one of the 10 men in charge of hearing legal cases. Legio III Gallica, that's a legion of Roman soldiers. So you don't have to worry about what all those posts were, but it basically is Pliny recording his career. So this is a statue that's been set up to commemorate Gaius Plinius Secundus. It's not a tomb inscription, it's just a commemorative inscription. So it doesn't really say who authorised the inscription, but usually it would be the members of the town or someone like that, or it might be done by imperial decree. The emperor might order it. Some members, the city council might order it, if you're sort of like a famous son of the city. And that was really something that was extremely important to the Romans. If you were following a career as a Roman senator or a member of the equestrian order or a decurion, as we'll talk about later, that's kind of like the pinnacle, that you're recognised as a great Roman, a great leader. You've had this brilliant career and you're recognised as such by your peers. To the Romans, that was extremely important. And that's really what you're after, to be recognised and lauded by your peers as someone great, as someone who's had a great career. And that was something that you were expected to do. The Romans and the Greeks had the same idea, that basically if you had wealth and power, you weren't expected to keep to yourself. You were expected to use that to the benefit of your fellow citizens. That was the expectation. So if you were a member of the senatorial order, you would basically be expected to undertake one of these careers, to use your own wealth to support your fellow men, the fellow members of your city or whatever. And we'll look at a couple more examples of this as we go further down. The Greeks actually had a word for someone who didn't do that, who kept to themselves. So we might think of someone who keeps to themselves, we might think that is a positive thing. But the Greek's word for it is idiotes, from which we get our word idiot. Idia actually means private in Greek. And idiotes initially was someone who was just private, who did not get involved in the affairs of his city or of his people. But to the Greeks and the Romans, that was a bad thing. And so we actually get our word idiot from that, which is kind of shifted in meaning, but it was definitely not a positive thing then, and obviously it's not a positive thing now either. So if you had that wealth and power, the Greeks and the Romans expected you to use it for the benefit of society. And so someone like Pliny wanted his career, all of these jobs that he did, he wanted them recorded. The next one is from the equestrian order, so that's the second order. To Titus Varius Clemens, Chief Secretary of the Emperor, Procurator of the provinces of Belgica, both German provinces, Rhaetia, Mauritania, Caesarensis, Lusitania and Cilicia. So they're various different provinces of the Roman Empire, and this guy had served in all of them. Military Prefect of the Britannica contingent of 1,000 cavalry, Military Prefect of Auxilia sent from Spain into Mauritania Tingitania, Military Prefect of the 2nd Pannonian Cavalry, Ala, and Ala is a cavalry unit. Military Tribune of Legio 30 Ulpio Victrix, so another legion, 6,000 Roman citizen soldiers. And Military Prefect of the cohorts to Macedonia Gallorum. The citizenry of Treveri dedicated this to him as an exemplary official. Okay, so this one is more specific because it actually tells us who is setting this up. So the citizens of Treveri, who obviously had had something to do with Titus Varius Clemens throughout his career, set this statue up to commemorate him. And to him that would have been fantastic, that he is being recognised by the people that he's worked with and worked for as a great Roman. And so he's done all these things, he's held all of these offices, and he's highly regarded, and now he's being honoured by his fellow citizens. And that's exactly what you want. So yet another statue plinth, this time from Noricum. The next one is from the later Roman Empire. So Valentinian and Valens are in the 300s AD. So the emperors Valentinian and Valens write to Mamertinus, the Praetorian Prefect. We wish the equestrian order to hold the second highest of all ranks in the city. So this is not making that so, it's kind of like recognise it, because they've always been the second rank. But the emperors, when they said something like that, they usually like to make it sound like they're doing this rather than it already existed. And to be chosen from freeborn Romans and citizens or from foreigners who are not bound to trade guilds. Because it is not right that men of this rank should be deprived of privileges, it will be their right not to have the fear of corporal punishment and criminal prosecution. They are also to be held as immune from those taxes levied against the senatorial order. So that's referring to the exemptions that the equestrian order held from certain punishments, and go a bit further into that later on too. Things that they were exempt from. So generally speaking, they were exempt, as well as the exemptions that a Roman citizen had. You had still more exemptions as a member of the equestrian order, and they kind of like varied over time. Now the source there, it's like abbreviated CODTHUT, but it stands for Codex Theodosianus, or the Theodosian Code. This is basically a collection of those rescripts. So you remember I talked about the rescript of the Emperor Claudius. In the 400s AD, they had the idea, rather than have to rummage through all these different sources to find these rescripts, what they should do is record them all and put them all in one massive book called the Codex Theodosianus, which is what they did. I'm really into Roman history, and as you may guess, and I really like reading Roman sources. Legal sources like the Codex Theodosianus are the most boring of Roman texts, but they can be useful because obviously they're collections of laws, collections of rescripts, so they can give us a lot of information, but they're not exciting reading. But nonetheless, that tells us what those laws were about those exemptions that equestrians had. Okay, the last couple are from the Decuriones. Now, the Decurions could be members of the equestrian order. So Decuriones is the Latin term. If you're anglicising it, you just write it as Decurions. But they were the city councillors. So often they would be members of the equestrian order, not necessarily, but they're sort of like the wealthy and powerful men in an individual town. So not Rome, but a town of Roman citizens outside Rome that have a city council, and the Decuriones are the main people that run that council. So this gives us a couple of their careers. This is another commemorative inscription. It's a statue. To Publius Lucilius Gemala, son of Publius, grandson of Publius. See, I told you the Romans weren't very invented with names. Great-grandson of Publius. Ideal of the sacred cult of Vulcanus. Ideal by decree of the town council, decretionis. The ideal is kind of like a treasurer. Member of the town council.